President Trump just took another shot at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It happened just moments ago. The commander-in-chief posted the following on social media, quote, "This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing and Europe." In the meeting they had with Zelensky, stated flatly that they cannot do the job without the U.S. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking? Now, the president was responding to Zelensky's comments that the end of the war between Ukraine and Russia is still, quote, very far away. Two verys there. He also wrote, America will not put up with this much longer. CNN is covering this from all angles. Chief Global Affairs correspondent Matthew Chance is in Moscow, but we are going to start at the White House with Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, can you explain a little bit more about this escalation that is on top of course, all of the escalations that we've seen starting with Friday?
Dana, it's the latest sign that temperatures have not cooled at all since Friday afternoon. During your show, when that meeting went entirely off the rails in the Oval Office with the biggest diplomatic breakdown that anyone certainly has seen in the television era. And the president posting just a short time ago, America will not put up with this for much longer. That is a bit of an ultimatum, signaling the fact that it raises a lot of questions. One question is, will the U.S. Withdraw its military assistance? Officials say that and everything else is on the table. The president actually was asked that by reporters as we saw him leave the White House on Friday night. He says, I will not answer that, but made clear it was on the table. So now, as we begin a new week here, after a weekend of European leaders rallying around Volodymyr Zelensky, the White House is not backing down at all. They are still ramping up their criticism of his conduct, of his behavior. And the president here was reacting to really the events of the weekend, as well as what he believes is Zelensky's insistence that he does not want this war to end. That, of course, is not the full picture. The full picture is how it would end, how peace talks would begin. A security agreement is still not been something that this White House is willing to discuss. So never mind the fact that Friday began as the idea of opening the door to signing a deal with Ukraine. That is not even being discussed now. It's about a continuing U.S. involvement in protecting Ukraine. And Dana, this deal was intended to be one of the centerpieces of the president's joint address to a joint session of Congress tomorrow evening. That, of course, is out the window. But clearly, he's keeping up this pressure and criticism, trying to put all the blame on Zelensky and the Ukraine side, as opposed to sort of answering any of the criticism that was at the U.S. Side, at least partially to blame for this. The White House is giving no inch on that, Dana.
Here at the table today, CNN's Manu Raju, Carl Hulse of the New York Times, and Jasmine Wright of Notice. It is your birthday. Happy birthday, Jasmine.
Happy birthday.
Thank you for spending it with us on this bright and cheery Monday. Just to go back to what President Trump said in that post that just came out right before our program started, saying that he doesn't believe that Volodymyr Zelensky wants peace. And I wanted to pull up what the Kremlin spokesman said about Volodymyr Zelensky, because it's very similar. The Kyiv regime and Zelensky do not want peace. They want the war to continue.
It's pretty remarkable. I mean, I think we're starting to see this amp up of pressure from the Trump world that they want Zelensky out, or at least they certainly don't support him staying in. And I was actually struck by even what the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, told you just yesterday about that, suggesting that, Churchill, comparing this to how Churchill stepped aside as they tried to negotiate peace post-World War II.
The talking points, that I want to get to that in a second, but what do you make of the talking points continue to run sort of in mirror image of one another from the Kremlin and the leader of the free world?
It is pretty remarkable, and it's one that's going to cause a lot of concern among key elements of his own party. We saw one member speaking out this weekend, Senator Lisa Murkowski, saying it makes her sick to her stomach that it appears that Donald Trump is aligning himself more and more with Putin. The question for me, too, is that how much does this impact the leverage and the ultimate negotiations to end this war, in the sense that Russia does not have to give up a whole lot now. This may actually prolong the war. Why would they need to actually cut a deal here if U.S. is not going to stand behind Ukraine at this key moment? So for Russia, this is great news for them, because they could ultimately get a lot more than what they would ultimately get if the U.S. was standing firmly with Ukraine.
And you did see both
Unified Europe against us, and that's interesting to watch.
But
right
by
now.
the way, when Johnson says we've been crystal clear that Putin has been the aggressor, the United States voted against a United Nations resolution saying that
5 days
Putin
ago?
was the
didn't just
aggressor.
abstain, voted no.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you were referring to, which is just back on the global stage, and what the maneuvering really is behind the scenes and in public inside the Trump administration vis-a-vis trying to potentially just push Zelensky out. Listen to the exchange I had with the president's national security advisor.
Are you suggesting that President Trump wants Zelensky to resign?
We need a leader that can deal with us, eventually deal with the Russians, and end this war. And if it becomes apparent that President Zelensky's either personal motivations or political motivations are divergent from ending the fighting in his country, then I think we have a real issue on our hands.
Yeah, I was in the South Lawn on Friday when President Trump was asked this by reporters, just a reporter to my shoulder, said, do you want Zelensky to step down? Do you basically want a regime change? And the president seemed kind of hesitant to go that far. He said, I want somebody who can make peace. If that is Zelensky, fine. If that's not, then, maybe we have to go somewhere else. But he didn't want to go that far. But I think that his answer really answered the floodgates for the rest of the Trump administration to double down and start pushing further and further onto this fact that maybe Zelensky should not be the person that is leading in Ukraine. I think one thing that is very, very evident is that any of the Republicans who are more globally minded, more defense hawks, this idea that the temperature would be taken down over the weekend, that has basically gone by the wayside. What the reality is that the energy inside the White House is shifting. They are doubling down on this position. They are doubling down on basically being against Zelensky. And I think even more importantly, the MAGA base is doubling down on it. They were already people who were kind of moving against foreign aid, not kind of, really moving against foreign aid.
They were there.
Yeah, they were there, moving against funding wars in different parts of the globe. And they kind of were sucking it up because this is a deal that Trump wanted to make. Now that it seems that this deal is not going to happen, you're seeing MAGA people kind of revel in the fact that we don't want to be a part of this, and Donald Trump shouldn't be a part of it either.
The anti-Ukraine wing of the GOP used to be so small, right? Remember when Zelensky came and addressed a joint session of Congress not too long ago? Standing and cheering both sides of the aisle. And it was the Matt Gaetzes, Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world that are in that contingent. It is much bigger now. And that's exemplified by Lindsey Graham being at the White House, speaking out against Zelensky just on Friday.
No question. As we go to break, I just want to emphasize and underscore where we started this program, which is that, as you said, the president is doubling down, tripling down on the tense relationship and on the notion that they are kind of done with Zelensky, saying America will not put up with it much longer. Really big development in a series of monumental developments.
Joining me now is David Ignatius, Washington Post foreign affairs columnist and an MSNBC contributor. Donald Trump says, David, that he wants peace. Then, after Volodymyr Zelensky said earlier today that the end of the war was far away, he wrote, America will not put up for this much longer. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength. What are they thinking? I know you wrote a column over the weekend, perhaps optimistically, that there could still be a deal. Do you still feel that way?
I think it's still possible. The Europeans are working on a unified platform of support for Ukraine. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, has made it clear that he would like then to mediate, in effect, between Ukraine and Europe and come back to a unified position that could go towards peace negotiations. Ukrainians told me over the weekend that President Zelensky, when he was at the Oval Office in that catastrophic meeting, came prepared to sign an agreement giving the U.S. a share of Ukraine's mineral rights in exchange for U.S. support in negotiations, and that they'd be ready to come back and resume those conversations. I think right now it's very fragile, hard to predict exactly where this is going, but my instinct is that there'll be, again, an effort by Ukraine to work out a deal with the United States and go into negotiations.
Well, point blank, can Ukraine exist without the support of the United States? Andrea was reporting just at the top of the hour, Andrea Mitchell, about the technology that the U.S. provides that Europe will not and cannot provide, the kinds of defense systems, for example, that the United States has. Does Ukraine really need a deal?
Ukraine does need a deal with the United States to be able to continue the war, but more to the point, to be able to get to a fair peace agreement in which the aggressor, Russia, is not rewarded. There are some extremely important systems that the U.S. And NATO allies provide to Ukraine that allow precise targeting of Russian positions in eastern Ukraine. Some of those are actually being financed by European countries, but without the U.S. anchor in terms of the satellite and other intelligence resources, I don't think those technologies will work. My biggest fear, Chris, simply is that Ukraine will run out of air defenses, and without air defenses, its territory will be as vulnerable to Russian attack as Gaza is to Israeli attack. That's the fear that Ukrainians have.
So part of this, guys, is optics. It's optics within the United States and within Ukraine, and it's also optics within all the other countries of the world, both the political and military leaders of those allied and adversary nations, but also just the populations. And there are times where, given how a certain leader conducts him or herself, they can turn their own people and the world's people against them, right? And that's what Donald is doing. Like, it's unfair to the vast majority of Americans who know he's being a nut job right now, but he's making his country look awful, and Zelensky's making his country look more sympathetic than it has in the last few months, right? As, sympathy or, people have gotten more fatigued by the conflict, Trump's recent actions has reinvigorated support for Ukraine among allies that we haven't seen in quite a while. And it's because Trump continues to make threats as these new meetings happen. Like, they're still around, and Trump is having these statements, putting out these new meetings saying, I'm going to threaten him and he won't be in power, basically implying there's going to be some sort of coup against him. God knows what Trump means there. But Zelensky, to his credit, showing the patience of a saint, saying, I'm still trying to make a deal here. Like, I don't think Zelensky is lying and saying, oh, yeah, that meeting went great last week, and any subsequent meeting we have is going to be easy. But he's like, look, fundamentally, we can make a deal. Because as he said, and he's right about this isn't about Trump's ego. It's not even about my ego, because even good politicians have egos and all of that. He's like, it's not about me and how pissed I am at Trump. It's not about Trump and how much of a toddler he is. It's about the interests of the two countries. And an interest of the two countries is for us to make a deal. One person sounds like a world leader. The other person sounds like a world menace.